Okay, so we're at the bottom of Lamed Tes Amid Base. Second line from the bottom. I'm sorry, the last line. Amar Rav Nachman. We're going to talk about different types of kinyanim, different types of, or not kinyanim, I should say, different types of transactions or declarations. What's the din as far as writing them down? So Amar Rav Nachman. Macho b'fnei shnayim. We just had this discussion about where Ruvain owns a piece of land previously, and now Shimon is trying to be machzik it, and Ruvain is making a macha and saying that the chazaka is not a good chazaka because I'm protesting in the middle of the 3 years. So we had the machlekes before it has to be b'fnei shnayim, b'fnei shloisha. We're saying it has to be b'fnei shnayim. Ve'ein tzarich leimer ksayvei. There's no necessity for the Ruvain, for the previous owner, the original owner, who's making the macha, who's declaring that Shimon's chazaka is not a good chazaka shalashon because he's registering his objection, he doesn't have to tell the Eidim who see that he's with the front of whom he's making his macha, he need not tell them to write it down because it's zachan l'adam shalei b'fanav. It's only a schus, it's only a benefit for Ruvain, who's making this macha, that it should be written down so they'll have a memorandum, they'll have something, he'll have something to refer to prove that he made a macha. Moidah b'fnei shnayim. Moidah is a different type of protest. It's a preemptive protest. It happens to be one of my favorite column in the Ami magazine is they have a weekly halacha question that they go through. It usually takes them like a month. They go through like a example of a case, and then they say what the halacha is. This was the month that we're talking about this case of a moidah, where someone, before he enters into a transaction, registers in advance that he's only making this transaction because he was forced to do so. There's going to be a little bit more about this in the Gemara later on. Let's say somebody knows that the mafia called him down and they're going to make him sell his grocery store to them. So he knows he's going to have to give in to them. So before he goes and writes his name on the shtar, before he signs the shtar, he gets the Eidim, before he hands over the grocery store, he goes to Eidim and he says, I want you to know that this kinyan that I'm going to be making in the future is not willingly, I'm being forced to do so. So you have to do that in front of Shnayim. Again, someone who's registering this objection in advance, he doesn't have to instruct the Eidim specifically to write it down because it's only a benefit for him. It's protecting him so they understand that he wants it written down in the shtar. Haidah, if someone admits, let's say Ruvain admits that he owes Shimon money, in that case, he has to tell the Eidim to write it down because he doesn't want to put himself in a position. He's not happy to give the shtar to Shimon, saying that he owes Shimon money, and it could be he'll end up. Maybe he's asking. Sometimes we talk about a shtar amana, where a person writes in advance or says in advance that he owes money to someone, but it's not necessarily a benefit. So even though he's being moide in front of Shnayim, he doesn't want the person to get the shtar, because what happens if he pays back Reuven? Reuven pays Shimon back, and then Shimon and he forgets to take the shtar, but he didn't know that the Eidim wrote a shtar, then Shimon could collect the second time. So you can't, the Eidim cannot on their own recognizance, based on their own initiative, write a shtar in a case where it's going to obligate the person who's making the declaration in front of them. Kinyan b'fnei shnayim, and finally, a fourth din, when someone makes a kinyan, Reuven sells something to Shimon, he makes a kinyan sudar, he picks up a piece of cloth and he says, I'm selling my cow to you, and he doesn't have to say ksuvu, and Rashi, the Rashbam, gives an explanation that by kinyan, because kinyan is like that it's something that the Gemara is going to say why, We'll see why, because this is a little bit controversial. Why is it that a kinyan is bifnei shnayim and it doesn't have? You don't have to write. You don't have to tell the Adam to write it down. I was going to ask him a manavshach, and we'll see what the reason is. Finally, v'kiyim shtaris b'shleisha. When someone is mekayim a shtar, he's doing that in front of. He does it in front of two Adam. He gets the Adam that signed on it. They now will say that it's the kiyim shtaris, that the signature on the shtar is indeed their signature. So, since it has to go, Renachman is saying that it has to be in front of three. So there's one man the Amr who holds that's because since you're doing it in front of a bezdin, you always need three, a bezdin of shloisha. There is the Rashbam explains that even according to the man the Amr, who says you only need two, there's a problem that if you write it as two Eidim, if people see that it's only two, they'll think it's Eidim as opposed to Dayanim. And then they'll think that it's two other Eidim are saying that this is the signature of someone else. So that people would think that these Eidim are just saying because they heard from the original Eidim that it's their signature. And that would be hearsay, which is not a valid type of it's when they're saying over that someone told me that this is my edus, this is my signature. That's not a good edus. So therefore, we require three, even according to Manda Amar, that a bezin could be two. In this case, we want three to distinguish it from a regular case of edus. So tomorrow, Iravi Amarav Ikashli Hakashli. From this whole list, there's one thing, as we mentioned, that's hard to understand. Hi Kinyan. We said about a Kinyan when Ruvain sells something to Shimon with a Kinyan Suda by lifting up a cloth. Heichi Dami, what's the case? Ikamaisa Bezin Dami, if we say that a sale of an object is like a Maisa Bezdin, it's just like when Bezdin declares something that belongs to someone else. We say it's a declaration of Bezdin. So every Kinyan has that din that it's as if a Maisa Bezdin. Liboy Tlasa. In that case, you should need three. A Bezdin needs three. Be like a Maisa Bezna, but if you say it's not a Maisa Bezna, that's not the reason why it can be done b'fnei shnayim, then why doesn't it amayin etzarach lemeksuvo? When Reuven says that I sold my thing to Shimon, he's obligating himself. And we said the only case in which you don't have to give specific instructions to the Adam to write down the transaction that just occurred is when it's a pure benefit to the person who instructed them to be aided. But over here, Ruvain is obligating himself to either hand over the money for what he's buying or hand over the object that he's selling. Basra the boy had the pash. After they asked the question, they explained it. The reason why you could do it b'fnei shnayim is because it's not a Maisa Bezdin. So we said, if that's the case, why do you write it down? Why is it that the Eidim are always, by default, expected to write down what occurred, and they don't need specific instructions from the person who put them up to this, even though he's obligating himself, he's not just getting a benefit from their memorializing what occurred. Mishum destam kinyan l'ksiva imid, because every kinyan is expected to be written down. The Rashbam explains that we're talking about here about a kinyan sudar. Kinyan sudars happen. Kinyan, that was the normal way to make a kinyan when someone was makna something from someone else. If you went to the store to buy a vase, you made a kinyan sudar. So since it happens hundreds, thousands of times a day, the Chachamim always assume that we want to make it as efficient as possible and to be able to happen as quickly as possible. So we treat it as if it's always expected to be written down. People don't want a transaction that's a totally normal transaction to be able to be reversed and then to have legal wrangling about whether it occurred. They want to have the receipt of what occurred. So therefore, a kinyan is an exception that even though what the person who's entering into this kinyan and he's making a kinyan sudar of his cow that's in the pasture, he wants that it should be written down that he's obligated to provide the cow, because otherwise it's going to make life very complicated for everyone. Zakt Gemara, Rabba v'Rav Yosef ta'ami travay. Loy kasvinin moida. We don't ride a moida. This is one of the examples, one of the things we talked about, which I brought my expertise from Ami magazine. When somebody makes a disclaimer before he enters into a transaction, and he tells Adam, "I want you to know before I enter into this garage in Bensonhurst with these mafia guys that the transaction I'm going to make there is forced, and I don't want it to be a valid transaction." So we said that you could do it in front of two, and you don't have to say writing. You don't have to you don't have to tell the aim to write it down because it's self-understood. It's only a benefit for you to have proof of what occurred, that you registered your disclaimer. So Zakti Gemara, Loi kasvin moida el aman dina. These Adim can, this that we said they write down the moida, that's only if it's a person that we know is a tough guy. It's someone who's going to be hard to get him to comply. So the person who is entering into this transaction under threat, it's only going he can only register a disclaimer beforehand that it's not that he doesn't really intend to go through with this transaction. It's only if the other people are people that he can't bring to the bezdin. But if it would be a fine person, why do you have to make a disclaimer? Just go to bezdin and clarify it. It forces you to make a kinyan. You just show up in bezdin and you say it never really happened. Take him to the bezdin. So therefore, you wouldn't need a maidah, and therefore you wouldn't write it down. Abai and Rava say no. It doesn't make a difference. In the end, it's a benefit. This person, for some reason, he doesn't want to even have to go to bezdin. He wants to be able to produce a piece of paper that he could wave in the face of the person who forced him to sell his beloved property, and say, "By the way, this that you just forced me to sell it was meaningless because look, I wrote a maidah in advance, disqualifying this sale." He doesn't want to have to go to bezdin. So even someone like Abai and Rava, who are obviously upstanding citizens, if someone's entering a transaction with them, they can make a maidah in front of them. Amri Nahardoy. Kol moidah, Deloy Koseba, Ananya Dinan Be Ba'oinsa de Planya, Lav Moidoi. Another requirement when you make this disclaimer in advance of a kinyan is he has to write in the moidah that the Edom have to write, we know what kind of force was exerted on the person making the transaction. It's not enough that that Ruvain, who's going now to enter into a shimon with this thug, with Shimon, who's a tough guy. It's not he just says I'm being forced. He has to explain what force is involved. He threatened he's going to shoot me, but if he just says I was forced, that's not enough. Lav moidoi. Moido demai. What does he have to say? What kind of force are we talking about? What kind of transaction is he entering into that he's saying he was forced? If Ruvain was saying, I'm being forced to give a get to my wife Rachel, or he says, I'm going to be forced to give a matana to Levi. So Gila Milsabali. Why does he have to justify and say what force is being put on him? As long as a person doesn't want to give a get and he doesn't want to give a matana, there's no benefit to him to saying he's being forced and then do it anyway. He obviously doesn't. These are things that it's his option if he wants to do them or not. So if he's saying he's being forced, obviously he's being forced. There's no reason why he would lie and say he's being forced and really he doesn't want to, and he really wants to do it. He doesn't have to do it if he doesn't want it. So why is he bothering to register this objection in advance? The Idazvini, and if we're talking about where, like we said, the classic case of Moedah, where Reuven is selling something to Shimon. He's selling his land. For Amar Rava, loy kasvina Moedah azvini. Rava says that we don't make a Moedah, a person can't make a disclaimer before he sells something. So the Gemara later on is going to tell us what the reason for Rava is. That when someone sells something and there's some kind of force being applied to him, the Adim on the sale will see that there's some force being applied to him. So they could be the Adim that it's not a valid sale. So why do you have to make a Maidah? The Adim of the Kenyan will see that there's force being applied, and they're going to get rid of it anyway. No, we could be talking about Azvini, but there are cases where a person has to make a Maidah, where he has to make an advance no disclaimer that the transaction is invalid. Moidi Rava, even though Rava said that generally there's no reason to make a Maidah on Azvini, Hechada Anis, in a case where he's being forced to Kamaisa de Pardisa, like the case of a Pardisa. What's the case of Pardisa? Of an orchard. The who gavra the mashkin Pardisa lechavre. L'tlash shlin. He made a mashkin of his orchard, which we've had many times. We've had this back in Bava Metzia, and we've had it again here in Bava Basra, where a person made a mashkanta de surah, right? Ruvain borrowed money from Shimon, and he gave his field to Shimon. He borrowed $300, and he told Shimon, "You can keep the peiros. You keep this field for 3 years and eat the peiros. And at the end of the 3 years, the $100 of peiros you get each year will add up to $300. You return the property to me at the end of 3 years, and I won't owe you any money." So that's how the property ended up by Shimon. So the mashkin padisa he gave his property to the lender for 3 years. After Shimon was sitting on the field and he had a chazaka, he had the field and he had a star that said that Ruvain gave him the field for 3 years in return for his $300 that he lended. Amar, he said to Ruvain, I'm not giving up on this so quickly. He mazavnisli mutav. At this point, I want to buy the field. I've gotten used to it. I don't want to give it back to you. So I want you to sell it to me. And if you sell it to me, that's good. I'll pay you. The field is worth $1,000. I'll pay you $1,000. Then and I'll do that. V'loi, but if you don't sell it to me, kavishnil shtar mashkanta, I'm going to deny that this was in my possession as a mashkin. Ba'amina lekuchi biyadi, and I'll say it was sold to me. Kahai gavna kasrina moita. In this case, Ruvain, there's not going to be any edim at the time showing that there was force applied, because he's going to use the force of this migu. He's going to use this force of this threat that he's going to just say, I'm not going to. He's not applying force. He's saying, I'm going to beat you up or I'm going to do it. He's just using his previous kayak that he was muksik in the karka. And no, that's not going to be in Bezdin. No one's going to know about it. And he's going to be able to force Ruvain to sell him the field. So in that case, Ruvain can go ahead. He'll say, you know what, I agree. I'll sell you the field for $1,000 so you don't get a mash, you don't get a chazak in it and claim it was so you have a chazak because it was sold to you 3 years ago. And then once he sells the field to Shimon, he'll go to Bez and he'll say, look, I have a maidah. I disclaimed before I entered into this transaction. And now Ruvain, in theory, can't claim. Now Shimon, in theory, can't claim that it was a chazaka because he went and bought it from Ruvain after the 3 years. He can't say the first 3 years were after he had sold it and now he has a shani chazaka. He has no taina. Even though I will note that we saw before that sometimes a person can buy something and tell us, say afterwards, I just bought it in order that I shouldn't have a difficulty. So the fact that you asked, we saw that if someone offers to buy something, that doesn't disprove his chazaka. But over here, it's not just he offered; he actually went through with the purchase. So when he goes through with the purchase, then he's ruined his previous chazaka. So that's what Reuven was trying to get. Amar Yehuda, Hai matanta tmirta. If someone makes a matana in secret, which we're going to say exactly how the secret works. But he told the Aiden, I'm giving this matana, but I don't want it to be known. Loy magvinimba. that star matana is not a valid star for the person who made the matana, who received the matana, to take it. What is the case? He tells the Adim who are watching him give the matana, and they're going to write the, like we said, in that case, they can't, and he's instructing them to write a star. Zilu atmuru b'kisvule. He told them, don't write a star in public, go write it in private when no one knows about it. So we say on such a matana, the person, we say that the person is up to shenanigans. Why is he trying to do this? Either he already gave away this matana. He's talking about his property he has a gas station on the corner. He already gave it away to Reuven, and now he's giving it to Shimon. And because he regrets giving it to, he doesn't want the person Reuven who he gave it to know that he gave it to Shimon. So this obviously is not a good matana because he already gave it away. It's not his anymore. Or it could be the other way around. He he's writing it in private because later on he wants to be a good big guy. He's going to go to the parlor meeting and say, "I'm giving the gas station to BMG." But in the meantime, then he's when BMG is going to come to collect, he's going to say, "Oh look, I have a shtar matana. I already gave it to Reuven a long time ago." So we're worried about these kind of shenanigans that this person who writes a hidden document. So one example, according to Rabbi Yosef, how do you do that? What's a case of a hidden document? That he told the Eidim to go write it in private. It's not that he told him to write it in private, but as long as he didn't tell them go write it in public, that means he's trying to. It's as if he said, go write it in private. My Beinai. What's the difference between the two shitas? According to the second shot, whenever he doesn't say that you should do it in public, it's considered to be a hidden matana, a hidden shtar. So if he says, go write the shtar matana, and he doesn't say to do it in public, that's going to be considered an invalid matana as a matana tmirta. But according to the first shot, it's unless he said do it in private, it's not considered, it's a valid matan. Amra Papa Hadu Rava, this sheet of Rava that he says that matana tmirta, a hidden gift document, is not valid. La b'ferishit. He doesn't say it directly. We learn it from a different thing that he said. The hu gavra, the azal dushi isisa. Reuven went to be Mekadesh Rachel. Amrulay, and it turns out Rachel was a gold digger. She said to him, if you write over to me everything you own, then I'm going to get married to you. But if not, I'm not going to get married to you. I think the Rashbam explains we're not talking about where he made it a t'nai, but she just made it clear to him that this is what I require. Azal kasvala. He went and he wrote her all of his nechasim. Asa break kashisha. His oldest son came, Amalei, Bahu Gavar Mataheola. What about me? You've given this, your 86-year-old Warren Buffett, you gave it to this 22-year-old woman, you gave everything you own. What's going to be with my $200 billion that I was expecting? Amaluhu L'Sahadi. So he went and told Adam, Zilu Atmuru Ba'avar Yamina, go hide in Eva Yamina on the other side of the river. But Ketzvulei and write a star. So he went. He said he's going to give the money to his wife. He didn't do so yet. He says first, before you go give the money to wife, go write a hidden star to my son. For Ketzvulei, and then afterwards you can go and write a star to my wife, giving her. So that way, my son will get his money, and this gold digger, I'll be married to her for a couple of years, and then I'll bring out my son's star and prove to her that I had given the money to him first, and you are out on the. You were so confident that you got all my money, you never got a prenup. you never wrote anything that you are entitled, and now I had nothing. I'm a poor man. You have to prove that you're married to me for love. Also, the Kamei de Rabba. He came to Rabba to ask him what's the din, because the problem is the first Kenyan was a hidden document. If the woman would have gotten wind that he had given away all his possessions, she never would have gone through with the marriage. Amaluhu, loy markan of loy markan. He says neither gets anything. The son doesn't get, and the wife doesn't get. Man the chazer, someone who saw this, mishum dehavi moido lechaverta. The reason is because we assume that the first Kenyan is not a good Kenyan because it was hidden, and it also serves as a moidah. He's by selling it, he's making clear that the second transaction was not. He didn't really want to do it. It's the fact that he made this invalid is also a haidah. Like we said, a person can go beforehand and go in secret. He's being forced. So this is why he's being forced by his future wife, by his matrimonial prospects. He's being forced to give away his property. It's not really a comparison to our din that we said that a matana tmirta, when someone gives to one person then to another one, it's not valid. Hasam over there, over there, it's different because he only gave her the money. It's clear that he only did it because she said, "I'm only going to marry you if you do it." So we know that it's a case of being forced, but he never wanted to be magneted. So therefore, we say that it's a maidah on what we say. The first kinyan that he gave to his son was not necessarily wasn't a valid kinyan. It was really intended just to void the second kinyan to the wife. But maybe you would say in a regular case where he first is makna to one in secret and then to another one in public, he wants the person who he's giving to in public. He does want him to be kind. We don't have the situation that the second person is forcing him and now he's giving him maidah. Without that, maybe Rava wouldn't hold that the second kinyan is not a valid kinyan.
So why doesn't she get the property?
Because we said in addition to the secret gift document being invalid, it also functions as a maidah. Like we had learned earlier, there's two things going on here. First, we're invalidating the secret gift document, but we're saying that secret gift document, it doesn't work as a transaction, but it does work as a maidah, as a disclaimer on the upcoming transaction that he's being forced to do it.
No one's forcing him.
Well, we're saying he's being forced that he wants to get married. So by doing what he's saying,
that's not called forced.
I don't know. I don't know that all men would agree with you. What if he's a 60-year-old bachelor? He can't get any shidduchim. And this woman, whatever, the chachamim are mashayir, that since she had to tell him, listen, why is she telling him you have to give me all your money before we get married?
She's greedy, that's what she is.
Okay, but he doesn't really want to do it. He's doing it because she's twisting his arm.
You're not forced to do it.
He's saying he agreed. But he's saying it, let's say he went and said explicitly to someone else, I'm going to be giving matana to my wife, but I don't want it to be a matana. That you'd be masking would be a good maidah? You think it's unfair to the wife?
But then it's a mekach.
So that's what I told you before, right at the beginning. We talked about a case where she didn't make it a t'nai. She didn't say, I'm only marrying you if this is. She just said, I want you to give you listen, we're so in love. This is a wonderful shidduch. It'll be so nice. You really should give me everything. And that way we'll know forever that we're going to be bound together by our ownership of $200 billion of Berkshire Hathaway stock. But she didn't say, even though the Gemara's Lashon sounded like it, she didn't say that the Kedushin is dependent on you giving the money. She said, once you give me the money, then I'll marry you. After you get the money, then we could get married. but not that one is dependent on the other. Let me see where the Rashbam says it. Amra v'havi v'hachmatan t'tmita moidol v'achachamish. Ela mechlolim v'toysu. Asa brei kashisha koyin v'ksivus shtar. Amul asadi kosh kasha shtar va. Zilo atma be'eva yemina. Ba'isem akam v'kasli. Loy markana haben mishum dehava t'mita. V'loy markana isha mishum t'mita hava lo moidol v'achla. V'loy. That is the command of lesson. So the Rashbam 4 lines for the Ram. The machmas ein. So what's the force? She'ein chafetza boy. They doesn't want to really give it to her. She'ein chafetza. I'm sorry. She doesn't want him. Elam ken yichtav loy. Hilach loy gomar b'liba lahaknas lo. He's not really deciding that he wants to be maknev. Elachi yisena v'yatzam. If hilach chasamu to have a makam oida. Yes, it doesn't really explain this. Yeah, it doesn't say it clearly, but l'chayr, that's what it has to be. Where she didn't make a tonight. But I hear what's bothering you. L'chayr, a person should be able to contract for what he wants to do, and you shouldn't be able to. You shouldn't be able to say I'm being forced to do something when you're agreeing to do it. I hear what your objection is.
I think that the fact that it's not a t'nai, it's even less of a force.
Okay, but he could, if it's not a t'nai. Listen, we want the kedushin not. We're not saying over here the kedushin is not chal, so we want the kedushin to be chal. But as far as the force, if he's saying I'm feeling forced and I don't really want to give matana, shouldn't a person have the right to give the matana? So he wants to give and not give. What if he just said, essentially what he's saying is this matana that I'm about to do, I'm not really doing. What if he told her, I'm going to give you the matana, but I'm going to say it in Spanish because I'm more comfortable in Spanish. And she doesn't understand Spanish. And he says to everyone there, this woman is forcing me to give her matana, but I don't want it to be a matana. And she thinks, oh, he gave me a matana. In the meantime, all he said was, I don't want to give her a matana. Should that be a matana? Obviously not. He never gave her the matana. She thinks he got a matana, but he didn't give it to her because he doesn't want her. So why can't he just nullify what he's about to say because he doesn't want to get into a fight with her? I mean, he doesn't need an onus to not give her the matana. He could just say, I don't mean to give you a matana. Now he wants to avoid getting into a fight. So he doesn't want to say it to her face, but he's saying it not to her face. Right? Like we said before, it's just a gilui milsa. On a matana, it's totally at his discretion to give the matana or not. He doesn't have to do it. So he's making clear in advance that he doesn't want to do it. So also milk the machmas einzu the castle. Halacha ma nichle de like ma le nichle. Iboilu stama mai. The Gemara now is going back to our original question of how between Rabbi. We said the two pshat and Rabbi Yosef. Does he have to explicitly say that in order for a kinyan to be a shtar matana to be invalid because he gave him a doh? Does it have to be that he told the Eidim to go write in hiding, or is it just the fact that he didn't tell him to write it in public? If he gave it stama, we don't consider it to be a matana tmerta, and it's definitely good, unless he says specifically you go and do it in hiding. Ravashi Amar chayshinan. Even if he did stama, we have to be chayshish, and therefore it's going to be it's going to be a matana tmerta. V'hilchas chayshinan. And the halacha is like Ravashi, that if he did it stum, unless he told him to do it in public, we have to worry that it might have been a matana tmirta, which had been used for the kind of shenanigans we described earlier, and therefore it's not going to be a good matan. Okay, we'll stop over here.
Okay, shkoyach.
Shkoyach, thank you for the discussion.